Live a life above reproach. There's a verse in 1 Thessalonians that says that we should avoid even the appearance of evil in our lives. In 1989, and then, which my wife and I had just bought in a house which was 2 doors down from Pauline's house. So I'm in the position of I'm married and my dad's dating. And yeah, that's just kind of awkward. But we could see, now we weren't sitting there just watching, but we were out and about and you see Dad's car down there and stuff like that. And so, okay, Dad's visiting Pauline, that's great. But one weekend, he was over at her house on Friday evening visiting, and then they also had plans for the next day on Saturday morning. And so he was there on Friday, and then he came back that Saturday morning to pick her up for whatever that day's activities were. But I remember Dad actually made it a point to park his car differently the night before than he did the morning. He backed it was forward the one time and backed it the other, because he said he didn't want it to look like he was staying the night or living there, which is an example of Dad being a man of integrity and being above reproach and not wanting to have the appearance of evil, even though we knew that would never happen. But he went that extra step, and I appreciated that about him as well. My brother Dan and I sometimes would refer to my dad as a Renaissance man. He seemed to be able to do everything well. He could farm, he could preach, he could work on car engines. He put an addition on his house nearly all by himself. I remember him driving a backhoe through the neighbor's backyard and digging the hole himself. I don't think he poured the foundation, but he helped frame the thing. He did all the plumbing and electrical and drywall and everything. And this was in the days before YouTube, when you could YouTube those things to find out how to do it. Anyway, he could handle finances and taxes like a pro. He was dabbled in photography and did a lot of that. And he could also make a great pizza. And I know many of you here today have eaten his pizza at one time or another, and they would have people over and have Dad's pizza. And so he was amazing. He could just do so many things well. Although I will say this isn't in my notes, this is free. He was a very single-focused man. He wasn't a multitasker. He couldn't do all these things at once. He was focused on one thing, and he'd do that one thing very well, and then he would go on to the next thing. But anyway, I really appreciate that about him. Also, for those of you who know my dad, you're probably aware that he was also very frugal. Dad spent his money wisely, but that frugality really applied only to how he spent money on himself, not others. He would not purchase a new piece of furniture if the old furniture was still in good shape, even though it was not in style at all anymore. He would eat a sack lunch rather than going out to eat. He would wear a shirt till it was threadbare before he bought a new one. I see some other people looking. There must be some other guys that do that too. I'm one of them too. Sorry, wife. They did a lot of traveling, but they would stay at the Super 8. They didn't stay at the Ritz-Carlton. They stayed at the Super 8. And so he was very humble in those regards. But as my father's dementia progressed, I took over the responsibilities of handling his finances. And I learned how much he gave to so many different ministries and charities and individuals. And it was just a blessing to see. And most people don't know a lot of what he did with that. And some of you might know also that he used to mow lawns after he retired, and he did it to stay active. He never exercised for the purpose of exercising. He did it, he wanted to accomplish something. So he mowed lawns, and when he did that, he did it again for exercise and to help people, but all the money he received for his lawns, he donated to charity. He didn't keep a dime of it. So that was my dad. Dad was always very, very faithful. It's another example of a characteristic I like. He led by example, in both of his marriages, to both Lois, my mom, and Pauline. He was faithful to both of them. I think I figured out between the two marriages, he was married almost 65 years. But my dad went through an extremely difficult trial when my mom, Lois, developed a rare brain disease. For the last 4 of those 6 years of her illness, she was in a nursing home, completely unable to communicate. Dad went to visit her every day, rarely missing a day. I think the only time he missed a day is when he went to my wedding and he went to my brother's wedding. That might have been the only day, the times he missed. But he was very faithful and lovingly caring for her, but getting nothing back in return, but he never complained. While this was going on, I got engaged to be married. And at one point in time, my dad came to me and he said, Dave, I just want to apologize that I haven't been able to have time to speak to you and kind of pass on some of his wisdom. And of course, he was a man of few words, but he came to me and he said, I apologize for that. And I said in return that, Dad, I learned more from you by your example of how you treated my mom than I could ever ask in any other way. So when I took the vows with my wife, I had to know I had to have that same commitment that my dad had, and he led, again, by great example. You also know that Dad used to be a pastor. As such, my brother and I, we grew up in the church. If the doors were open, we were there. And as a matter of fact, there was not an excuse that my brother and I could come up with that would allow us to get out of going to church. And of course, we attended Bethel Church here for many years, and my dad was very faithful in doing that. And most of you probably recognized or saw that in the last couple of weeks, my dad was not able to be here. But you know, as I said before, Dad always led by example. So he wasn't able to be here, but it's only because he was getting ready to go home to be with the Lord. Dad did love to travel. He had been to all 50 states and had visited many foreign countries. He even visited our EC churches in Mexico and Japan. As a matter of fact, I think Dina Royer is here this morning, and she was one of the ones they first visited in Mexico. But I can't imagine a greater trip than the final one that he took this last week to his heavenly home. Dad was a remarkable man, and will leave a large hole in our lives. But we take such comfort in knowing that he is now in his eternal heavenly home with his Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Thanks.
Thanks, Dave. We have very similar memories, and I think we'll hear that in a few minutes. But for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dan DeVries. I'm Vern's oldest son, Dave's older brother. I grew up here in Dixon, grew up here in Bethel Church, and that was many, many years ago. And I've spent most of my adult life in Houston, Texas. But I as well appreciate each one of you being here. Great to see so many of you that I haven't seen in so many years. And this is an important day, and we appreciate you sharing it with us. So we've already heard a lot about the qualities of my dad that represent an upright life and which allowed him to leave a legacy of faith and service and care for others. And I'd like to do that as well. But I'd also like to maybe share some lighter insights into Vernon DeVries. Probably better pull these out. For example, when he was at home, Dad was never one, as Dave suggested, to just sit idly by. He always had to be accomplishing something. You might not be surprised that other than the evening news, he was not a big TV watcher. He just found that a little bit frivolous, I think. He'd sit in front of the TV and watch a drama or a sitcom or something like that. He had better things to do. But there was one big exception. Dad loved variety shows. Whether it was Carol Burnett, Flip Wilson, the Smothers Brothers, Donnie and Marie, or even Hee Haw. That was the type of entertainment that Dad had time for. When I was born, we lived up in Michigan, which was in the Eastern time zone, and he tells me that when he was up giving me my midnight feedings, he got hooked, I guess, on the new young host of The Tonight Show named Johnny Carson. Watched him every night while he was feeding me. And you know, for the next 30 years, I don't think he missed very many of Johnny's monologues. His nightly routine was to always watch the local news at 10 o'clock, and he'd watch it through the weather, which was important. Well, then the sports comes on, which he didn't really have time for or care about. So he'd go and he'd get ready for bed, and he'd be back just in time to watch Johnny's monologue every night. The other exception was from when I was young. On Saturday nights, he would watch Get Smart, and later Hogan's Heroes, I believe. But the difference is, while he was watching, he was polishing his dress shoes for Sunday morning service. So he was accomplishing something. But it's funny, but to this day, when I smell shoe polish, I think of Get Smart, and I think of those big old size 12 dress shoes. As you might also suspect, Dad didn't have money and things like that. And he would occasionally take us to a drive-in or a movie theater to see a family movie, but he wasn't a big on going to the movies himself. But I do seem to recall back in 1977, I think it would have been his 19th anniversary with my mom, he took her to see the hot new movie, Star Wars. And I remember they came home afterwards and came in and were like, "Hey, how'd you like it?" And he just had that look on his face like, "That's 2 hours of my life I'm never going to get back." Dad was meticulous in his record keeping and his bookkeeping. Dave sort of alluded to that. I think I've told this story in other forums before, but I want to tell it again today. When I was young, early junior high, I guess, I got a paper route delivering newspapers for the Dixon Evening Telegraph. And the way it would work is that every week I would have to go and knock on every door and collect the 65 cents or whatever it was for that week's papers. And then on Saturday mornings, I'd go down to the Telegraph and settle up with them for what I owed them. Of course, some people would not be home, so I wouldn't get that money for that week, and others wanted to pay for extra weeks, maybe a couple of weeks in advance or a month in advance or something like that. So if more people paid the extra than I was short, there would be extra money. And all of my paperboy friends, that was a windfall. That was a big week. When they got people paying ahead, they would go out and they'd immediately spend it on baseball cards or candy or whatever we bought at 13 years old. But no, Dad was not going to have me do that. Of course, that was short-sighted because in future weeks when they'd already spent that money, they didn't have it to pay for that week's newspapers, and they had to take it out of their own pocket. Well, what Dad did was he sat me down and we developed a spreadsheet. And when I say spreadsheet, this was the 70s. This is not computer spreadsheet. This was a ledger book, I imagine, which Dad had hundreds of. And he had me track all of the payments that I received and net out the advance payments each week so that I'd have the same net income each week. And I would never be in a position where I wouldn't have enough money to pay my debts. What I didn't realize was at the same time, he was actually teaching me business accounting. He was teaching me accounts payable and gross income and net revenue and past due receivables and all these things. I just didn't realize it. And I've taken those things, whether I liked it or not, into all of my financial activities throughout my life and all of the organizations that I've served as treasurer of. That's all just ingrained in me. That comes straight from him, and he did that very early in my life, and I appreciate that. It's been noted that Dad was frugal, and that's definitely true. However, it's also been noted that one thing he was willing to spend money on was a family vacation. Virtually every summer, we'd load up the family car and head to Colorado or Washington, D.C., or we'd drive completely around one of the Great Lakes,